Hey, welcome back to another episode of Parker's Pensées. I'm your host, Parker Sedecase, and this is a podcast where we explore all the deepest ideas in philosophy, theology, nature, and life. I love thinking about cool stuff, so come think with me. This episode is very, very special. I have with me Dr. Ed Uszynski coming back again, and we're going to be talking about his brand new book, Untangling Critical Theory. Oh, Critical Race Theory. That's a big one. Those are different things, as we'll find out. Ed's been on to talk about this a few times already, 3 or 4, and you guys have loved it. It's a heavy topic. It's not my favorite topic, but Ed is one of my favorite people to talk with, so there's some redemption there for it. All right, we're going to get into critical race theory, the Christian church, how Christians should think about it, all that really fun stuff and hard stuff. Before we do, I'm going to go against the critical theorists and I'm going to do some commodification. So if you guys like this podcast, and you want to see more episodes, please consider becoming a Patreon patron. You can also find cool merch. I'm not a critical theorist, man. I will commodify anything in my life. So you can buy stickers of my dogs, which is fun. So you can find all those links in the description. Please support the pod, especially if it's your top 5, top 10 favorite. All right, that's enough of that. So let's jump in with Dr. Ed Uszynski. Ed, thanks so much for coming on the pod, man.
Good to be back. Yeah, I love the reference to a few years ago. I was thinking about this. We did, I don't know, three different shows, I think. I don't even remember
like that.
what I was talking about. Yeah, but that was at the very beginning of me starting to put this book down on paper.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really helpful, actually, for me to realize that a lot of probably even what I said on the show was more cluttered than I wanted it to be. And it's been good for me. You know, it's always good when you have a chance to teach or you get a chance to be on a podcast to realize whether or not things are clear in your own mind, you know?
Yeah.
So that helped me. It helped me a ton. Yeah.
Yeah, man. Well, that's great to hear. I remembered because I was reading this book yesterday and today, especially going back into it. I remembered you're a double master's guy from TEDS. That's like, bro, same here. I love it. I love to see it.
Right on. When were you there?
I just graduated in 2021, and then I got a master's in philosophy after that. But
okay, yeah. That's right. And I remember talking to you about that. So mine were back. I started in 96 and finished in 2001.
Nice,
that was like
man.
another lifetime ago.
Yeah. And you were systematic theology and like cultural studies, right?
Yeah. I did the master's was in Christian thought that actually ended up being more of an urban studies degree, way more than I thought it was going to be. We were doing lots of, what does justice look like in the cities? What does it mean for the gospel to be lived out in urban spaces? We did a lot of work in that, which ended up, informing my thinking in this book quite a bit. And then I did my MDiv was more systematic theology. Yeah. And I'm largely in the same place. It's probably even worth saying because so much of what I'm doing in this book winds up sounding more, in maybe a more progressive direction, maybe.
Sure.
But it's really, my theology hasn't really changed a bit since my days at TEDS back in the 90s. If anything, it's become more solidified, I think, in my mind, which is really interesting that I've almost become more socially liberal in my thinking, but I'm definitely more conservative in my theology, which is not usually a combination that holds together for people.
Yeah, that's an interesting place to be, man. I like it.
Yeah.
Well, so after your time at TEDS, actually, by the way, were you living on campus there?
I was not. I was just off campus. Just down the road from Michael Jordan's old house. I don't even realize that. Michael Jordan, I don't know if he still lives there, but he lived right down the road from TEDS.
I used to always take anyone visiting down there. They'd be like, man, I don't know. There's not much going on. And I'm like, yeah, I know. But Michael Jordan's house down here. Let's go look at that.
Right. Yeah, the 23 on the
gates.
Yeah. So a lot of the Bulls actually live down there. I didn't live with the Bulls, but I did live with a host family for much of the time there. Yeah.
Okay. That's cool, man. Well, so after that, you went into, was it Bowling Green where you did your PhD?
Did my PhD at Bowling Green State University. Started in 2008. Yeah, so it was about an 8-year layoff where, again, it's kind of a bizarre combination, I guess, that I went and did 2 pretty conservative theological degrees, and then I swung the pendulum all the way to the other side of the academic, spectrum and did a very secular PhD driven by very progressive ideas and founded in Marxism, which I didn't realize I was really signing up for that too. It's interesting. I went and did all these degrees thinking they were going to be one thing, whether it was at TEDS or Bowling Green, and they actually wound up taking me down some paths I didn't expect to go, which actually was
Totally.
it was good for me.
Well,
But
it was what was it called? American Studies PhD or something?
American Culture Studies.
Okay.
Yeah, so it's just a deep dive into analyzing the way American culture works and why it works the way that it does, but looking through a very progressive lens and
Yeah.
looking through a very Marxist inspired and Marxist founded view of the world and what's happening politically, what happens economically, why things are the way they are.
Yeah. Well, I don't think I've ever asked you this, Ed, but what kind of degree is that? Is that a sociology?
Yeah,
There we
yeah.
go. Sociology.
Yeah, I would
Okay.
consider it sociology big time. And of course, it was very interdisciplinary. So
Sure.
I was taking classes in race. I was taking classes in women's studies. I was taking classes. My emphasis was actually in communication and film and media, a lot on advertising and rhetoric. So my focus wound up being much more on how words work.
Yeah.
To create values in people and to create desires and those sorts of things. A whole bunch of my work was in that. Of course, it was a long time ago now.
Mm.
And then I was all being done with sort of among the usual suspects in sociology, looking through a race lens, looking through a gender lens, looking through sexuality. Herbert Marcuse wanted that to be the case back in the 60s.
Yeah.
I'm sure a bunch of your listeners know who Herbert Marcuse was, kind of the godfather of the New Left back in the 60s. And he really encouraged Marxist-minded people who wanted there to be political and social revolution to stop worrying about the workers and hoping that workers would rise up.
Yeah.
Start actually paying attention more to people who actually are experiencing direct oppression, either because of their race or because of their gender or because of their sexuality that kind of goes outside the norms or what's considered normal. Start to gather those people together and see if you can rile them up and create some more revolution, which is really pretty fascinating. So I think it'd be interesting even for people that are listening. I still haven't really been able to track this down, but I think he's a large reason why those categories started to be grouped together in university settings. You know, you often end up studying race, gender, sexuality as part of sort of a conglomeration under the same umbrella as far as departments go. You know, they run in the same arenas in the university setting. And I think he's a large reason why.
I think that makes sense, man. When you were studying there at Bowling Green, what'd you end up doing your dissertation on? I don't know how sociology works, actually. I mean, I assume you guys wrote a dissertation under a professor, a Dr. Vather or whatever.
Oh yeah, it was a beast. Well, here's what's crazy. So I wanted to do it in race. I wanted to do it in I wanted to do something that had more to do with relationships and kind of the state of human interaction. And the more I got into both of those categories, I realized that if I did this, it was probably going to take me a lot longer to get out and done. And so I wound up moving back towards something I already was very familiar with, and that was sports and religion. And asking the question of how it is that sports in some cities, especially professional sports, winds up taking the place of religion and fulfilling a lot of what religion had done historically for people. Now that we're in sort of a post-Christian age and where religion is maybe not as in vogue now as it was 50 years ago, what are people replacing that with? And so I explored the pro sports scene in Cleveland, Ohio, which is where I'm from. And where I already had sort of an intuitive sense that sports were fulfilling more than just an entertainment value for people there, as opposed to where, you know, you're in Los Angeles and sports really are. They're just one entertainment option amongst a bunch.
Right.
Sports in Cleveland play a different role. So I did this ethnographic study at a bar that have been around for 100 years and just dug into the lives of these people who are all diehard sports fans. And it was actually pretty fascinating. It's you can look it up. It's out there online.
Yeah. What's the bar for the Cleveland folks listening?
The Parkview nightclub. The
Okay.
Parkview nightclub. Yeah, fascinating history. Like they used to run illegal alcohol in tunnels from across the river down into the basement of this place. I mean, it was
Wow.
like had this fascinating history. There were unsolved murders that had happened at the bar there. I mean,
Wow.
it was, just this amazing history, super interesting history. But the regular patrons there are there for communal purposes, obviously. They're there with among a shared history of sports. They're there to talk about their families. Again, you just kind of dig into what people are actually doing in that space around sports. You realize that it's trying to fulfill something that religion had historically done
Yeah.
for people.
Yeah.
I don't think it does a good job of replacing it.
Sure.
When push comes to shove and you're laying in a hospital bed dying of cancer, your Cleveland Browns championship pennant from 1964 is not the thing that's going to bring you salvation,
Right.
right? In the ends.
Yeah.
But as far as just the way we do day-to-day life, it ends up filling a lot of gaps that
Yeah.
religious life used to fill. So that could be a podcast in and of itself. I didn't even
Yeah.
know we
Totally,
were
man. Oh,
yeah,
that's
there's
good. I love it. I would just want to pull and see what comes out. Bro, like you're from Ohio. I knew that. A lot of
yep.
my friends from Ohio are from rural Ohio, and so they're like, when we talk, I work for Athletes in Action. You work for Athletes in Action. Actually, Ed, are you still with AI?
I am. That's an
Nice.
interesting question. We'll leave it at I am.
Great.
I'm
All
still
right.
doing
Cool.
a lot of
Yeah.
stuff with AI.
Yeah. So a lot of my friends in AI are from rural Ohio, or rural Iowa or something.
Yeah.
So we go through these trainings, and some people would say these are CRT trainings, and this is the devil and it's a new religion. Whatever the case, I hear from some of my friends, and they're like, we had one black dude in my whole school, and I'm like, what, bro? I'm from the suburbs. Like my best friend growing up was black, and my other best friend was Korean and Iranian. Like, what are you talking about? So I kind of thought that was your experience. So I'm so glad that you included some of your stuff in here. You have this crazy story. I don't know how crazy, but you have an interesting story about asking your friend to prom, and she was a black girl, and her mom was like, I don't know. Can you fill us in on that story?
Ooh, that's good, Parker. Wow, nobody's poked at that one yet. That's a good one. Well, I let me just back it up a little bit. Yeah,
Yeah.
story is that I just grew up at this intersection of white, black, and Puerto Rican people. Okay, about 20 miles west of Cleveland. And to your point, Parker, I just assume that's how everybody grew up. That
Right.
everybody just kind of grew up amongst a mix of different races and ethnicities. And then when I got to college at Kent State, when I was doing my undergrad, for the first time, I was meeting white people that had never been around any black people. But I was also meeting black people that had not had much interaction with white people.
Mhm.
Their schools, their teachers, everybody was black in their life. So that was different for me. The story that I told was just saying that we all got along. We tolerated each other. I think we all felt like we were racially sort of advanced, I guess, in the way we operated with each other. But I said racism was always right beneath the surface.
Mm.
Different strains of racial animosity could jump out at you at the least expected moments. So, like you said, there was this girl that I was super close to, great friend, close to her family, black family, south side of town, and I wanted to take her to prom for a number of reasons. And I just thought this would be a for sure. There's no way that her mom and dad wouldn't want me to. So I'm just going to ask her mom and dad just to kind of get some big boy points. And so when I came over to ask, they basically said no. And I come to find out that, and she was crying, her mom was crying, but she said the main reason why is because she couldn't have her daughter taking a white boy to prom. That just
Mm.
it wouldn't play well in the neighborhood, and it wouldn't play well at church, which is
Yeah.
interesting. Her church friends just, there was an expectation within their community that they would take significant moments like that and experience them with people from the same race.
Mm.
which was just, really interesting to me. I had never experienced anything directly like that. And honestly, I really do totally understand it. I understand it even more 40 years later, but it hurt in the moment. And I suppose if I really, really thought about it now, it would still hurt today,
Yeah.
when relationship gets trumped by racial history, or
Mm,
it gets trumped by racial concerns. And it's one of the things though that also just helped me realize, like, we are a racialized culture.
mm,
You can't not see race.
yeah.
It doesn't mean everybody's racist, although we can talk more about that. I'm not saying that everybody has this built-in animosity or hatred towards people who are different from them, although I think that's also pretty easy to find inside of us. But that's not my point. My point is, we live in a country that has historically paid very close attention to race. And even if that's been downplayed since the 60s in different ways, and it's been amended by some of the laws and
Mhm.
civil rights legislation that's taken place, it hasn't stopped us from being racialized, where
Yeah.
race still is important. We do see race. We do think about race, even if it's distasteful to us or we don't like to admit it to ourselves. And
Well,
so,
Ed, can I jump? I want to jump in on that.
yeah.
Is that a bad thing? So is racialized? Does it have negative connotations, or could it? I don't know. Could it be like the multi-ethnic rainbow melting pot or salad bowl, like celebrating each other's distinct? Is racialized? It sounds like it's got negative connotations. So I don't know if it
Well,
does
it's
or not.
got negative connotations because race itself is based on the idea of making distinctions among one another, where some are seen as better than others.
Okay.
Okay. So I just think the word race itself comes from the idea of separating on the basis of this is good, that's bad. It's imbibing or imbuing meaning.
Hmm.
It's giving meaning to skin color that is not justified most of the time and shouldn't be there. So, but yes, if everybody actually just embraced one another's cultural differences and we were able to really affirm them in one another, which I think is ultimately the goal. It certainly is supposed to be the goal within a Christian worldview,
Hmm.
that we would affirm the differences that God has created us with, and recognize that we need each other, and we need things that come from different places, different cultural places. All would be good, but come on, man, that's not at
Right.
all normally the way it plays itself out.
Yeah. Is the okay? So you talk a lot in here. This is a great book, by the way,
Thank
and I
you.
commend it to my Christian audience. You talk about the goals of CRT. Actually, we've talked about this on podcasts, and I'm kind of overlooking it. But I should say, for those you get the book, there's a great chapter on Marxism. There's a great chapter on critical theory and how that is informing critical race theory and different still, and capitalism, and there's a lot of great stuff in there. But I wanted to focus more on CRT here, critical race theory. Is the goal is one of the goals of critical race theory to de-racialize society? Do they think, would a proponent of CRT, a secular proponent, think that that is a good goal to de-racial, or that it's even like a possible thing to de-racialize society?
Man, that's a good question too, Parker. Would a secular proponent of critical race theory say that that's a goal? I think the answer is yes.
Mm,
That's even what the whole anti-racist notion is, or anti-race notion is, that we would strip the meaning away, that we would level the playing field. Again, let's just call this what it is between white and black, that
okay.
white has always kind of been at the top of the hierarchy and black has been somewhere below it. Black and other non-white has been somewhere below it. How do we level that playing field out? And in some cases, how do we even maybe tip it? I really do think this is what ends up happening. How do we tip it so that maybe black folks would be on the top of the hierarchy for a
Yeah.
while? What would that look like? I think that is what they want deep inside, but at the very least, for it to be equal. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that will never happen.
Yeah.
um, right, but you're asking me, what do they hope will happen? And I think that is a goal that they
Yeah.
have, for
Okay.
sure.
Well, let me ask you then. So one of the tenets of CRT is that race is a social construct, and as a Christian, I'm tempted to agree. Like I think that it's the human race. I think we are literally all are descended from Adam, and maybe what's picked out in some of the race, like in the races that people say are socioeconomic and political and cultural groups, right? They're not distinct races, because races sounds like you're a different thing than I am. So I don't know, man. What do you make of that statement that race is a social construct?
Well, that's where it starts, Parker. I mean, we already kind of said this, that
Yeah.
if you're gonna take over a group of people, or you're gonna try to enslave a group of people for whatever your reasons are, and again, this isn't just white, black, this is
Right.
human beings. If you got a strategy to take over a group of people, one of the things that you're gonna have to do is dehumanize them. You're gonna have to make it popularize the idea that they are less than, so that you can sleep at night and you can look yourself in the mirror. You're going to have to make them as something less than human, and that's what people have done across history, right?
Yeah.
So in America in particular, this was done with Native Americans, and it was definitely done with black folks. That when we say race is a social construct, it means you had to create meanings. You had to socially construct this idea of black people being a certain kind of way that made them less than human, so that we can justify enslaving them. And conversely, then we're going to have to hold up, in this case, the white race or people with white skin, and make them superior in bunches of different ways so that we can feel justified in their subjugation. And
Yeah.
that's just kind of the way it is, right? So, yeah, I think that's an undeniable idea
Yeah.
that race is a social construct. And
Yeah.
it's
So
been
it's not.
true in the church. It's been true in the church too. Yeah.
Yeah. Not. So it's not. It's like a. There's all sorts of outdated and gross biology and science, like phrenology, looking at this shape of the head or the dots in the skull or whatever,
Yeah.
trying to prove it that way.
Yep.
Um, do you think? I mean, so Christians. Do you think a evangelical Christian should like oppose the idea of races, of like African American race and Puerto Rican race and white race? Should we try to like oppose it? Is that part of the problem? I know there's different ways to address it, but what do you make of that?
I think that ideally Christians are playing two different roles in this discussion at
Mm,
best. One is to recognize the social construction reality,
okay.
and that we have, to our shame, not upheld a Christian view of ethnicity and a Christian view of humanity, but we went right along with that social construction.
Yeah.
Okay. And we're living amongst we continue to live amongst the consequences of that in the church, to our shame, and to God's judgment, however it is that God has judged that, and will judge that maybe in the future.
Mm.
But that's demonic, that we have partnered with Satan. How's that sound? We partnered with Satan in subjugating groups of people. And so we should be able to confront that and not run from that or be afraid of that, which is one of the things that I'm concerned about today, is that I just don't think we take seriously enough that history. And we try to act like that history is just like way back somewhere in the past and doesn't continue to have consequences today.
Right.
I think that's a mistake. The other role, though, that we should play is exactly what you just represented, or have already represented, is how do we appreciate our differences? How do we, and not just even tolerate our differences, but how do we become inclusive? And again, I know that's kind of a dangerous word in these conversations,
Yeah.
because I don't even mean in sort of a DEI inclusiveness, where at worst we're going to try to force diversity into our spaces, but we are actually going to welcome it because we recognize that difference is good.
Yeah.
And that God will even show different glimpses of himself in different ways through the eyes of people that come from different cultural realities.
Hmm.
I think we should be leading the way in doing that. And again, I say some people have been doing that. Some people have been confronting the racial construction heresies that we've been a part of as a church. They've been doing it for decades.
Yeah.
And some people have done a very good job of being inclusive in the best sense of that term. But I don't think that collectively that's our reputation across this country. I think there's still a lot of work to be done in more places than we want to admit.
Ed, I think that's such a really helpful clarification you just made, because I take exception to this sometimes when I'm doing a AI training and someone comes in and says, you as a majority white culture, you think this way. I'm like, shut up, dude. My dad's brown. He's called the N-word his whole life. You don't know anything about me, and you're doing the exact same thing that you're saying other people are doing.
Yeah.
Like, maybe you don't know me that much, and you can say generally, you can speak in generalities because of course you have to,
Yeah.
but don't, like, you ask me what my experience is. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Good. And well, I used to feel that way. This is such a good part of this conversation, Parker, because I feel like I sat for years in my American culture studies classes with people that were always making blanket statements about men. And it was interesting. I was sort of the outlier on every um, social identity that's despised. So
I
I'm
I love
male,
that, dude.
I'm white, I'm
Yeah,
heterosexual. Oh, and let's throw in Christian missionary on
yeah.
top of it, like an evangelical
The
Christian
evangelical one. Yeah,
missionary. Like he's not a universalist or anything
yeah,
like. Man, I like
yeah.
checked all the boxes for everything that everybody hated.
Mhm,
And so I would hear lots of this is how these groups are. And it's interesting, dude, because I do understand the defensiveness. I definitely have some of that in me too. That's like, well, I'm
mm,
not like that, or
yeah,
I've tried to grow or whatever. Give
right,
me a little credit.
yeah,
But most of the time, I like playing the card of let me just try that on. Okay, you're has this been true by and large for people that look like me?
mhm,
Has it been more true than not? Whether they look like me because they're male, or they look like me because they're white, or they look like me because they're heterosexual,
mm,
have these experiences that of oppression, there's a hot word, mistreatment,
yeah,
not being included, have people that look like me and act like me, by and large, has this been true about the way they've operated in history? And too often, man, the case has been that, yeah, it is true.
mhm,
Maybe I am a little bit of an outlier. Maybe I've actually been a part of this more than I even care to realize. I've been part of the mistreatment, or I've been just indifferent to it. And so I become complicit in it in some kind of way. I've always been okay with exploring that. And maybe that's
mm,
because I'm pretty secure in all those identities about myself. I don't feel insecure as a man. I have insecurities. I don't feel insecure about being male.
yeah,
I don't feel insecure about being heterosexual or apologetic about it, even
yeah,
though they try to make you feel that way.
yeah,
I don't feel insecure about being white. I really don't.
mm.
Um, so, but I totally understand that initial impulse to get defensive or want to push back. Things don't usually go well though when I do that though, right, Parker? I mean,
Nah,
they
but
don't.
also, dude, you're Gen X.
Um, what's the one right before Gen X?
I think those are boomers. I don't think you're a boomer
Yeah,
though.
no, I'm Gen X. Yeah,
Yeah,
totally Gen X.
you
80.
you guys you guys are the coolest guys. Like, I'll say, like, all my friends who are Gen X, like, just cool. And I'll ask you guys, like, what does it mean to be a man? And most of you guys are like, I don't know, dude. Just don't worry about it so much. Just be a man. You're doing okay. Just. But I'm a millennial, dude, and I'm a young millennial, and we're like, what does it mean to be a man? Like, for real? Because I don't know. I wrestled my whole
Fair.
life, and now everyone else around me is telling me that that's not what it means to be a man.
That's
And
fair. Yep.
so we're in a different world. The Gen Zers are like reacting in crazy ways. I think some of them are just eating it hook, line, and sinker. Some of them are going nuts in the other direction, and you're like,
Yeah.
that's a bad consequence. So
Yeah.
I understand, and you guys are awesome and chill. Some of us are like, dude, I'm trying to find my bearings. I don't know.
Mm.
I'm torn apart all over the place because wherever I go, I like to push back on stuff. So someone says, "Here's how it is," and go, well, "Why? Why think that?" And so I'm either the liberal or I'm the ultra conservative, depending on who's around.
Okay.
I'm sure you probably get some of that too.
Well, I just think it's really insightful what you even just said about generationally, because I think I do come from a time. I was born in 1968. Man, and things were definitely socially unstable during that
Sure.
time. In the 70s, there was all kinds of upheaval with divorce becoming much more common, right? So there was
Mm,
upheaval in the home structure, and I think it did start to become way more unstable, but I was still part of, maybe I lived in sort of this liminal space
mm,
where there still was a pretty clear understanding of what those things meant. And you could land on the ground in a secure way about your masculinity, your sexuality, your race. I started from a place of security with
Mm,
that. So it is interesting to hear you say, because totally agree, man. It's only
yeah,
become more unstable and more insecure. And so it becomes more threatening
yeah.
when people are making accusations that you don't think are true or that are destabilizing the way you think about yourself.
Because I'm finally starting to get a grip.
Yeah,
I wear the mustache is just a placeholder for when I figure out what a man is. Then maybe I can shave my mustache. But for
right
now,
on.
it's at least something.
It's a part of the costume, right?
That's right, dude. Well, I wonder, is it worth talking about where critical race came from with Derek Bell and Harvard?
I mean, I don't know. I don't know what would be interesting to people that are listening. I mean, it. What do you feel like you know about it, Parker? Tell me this. Yeah, tell me a little bit about what your exposure's been to where it came from, and I'll fill in some blanks,
To me,
maybe.
to me it sounds like Derek Bell was doing a pretty good job, 1970s, pushing back on some of the laws that were being re-racialized or like taken back to Jim Crow-esque type stuff. And so this dude's out here in the void, like, no, I'm not going to let some of that stuff happen, and I'm going to push back against it. And then it
He
seems
was a
like,
he was a desegregation lawyer, so he was
okay,
working to try to get kids into schools,
yeah,
right? So he was trying to get all these new laws passed that would make it possible and stable for them to have good education experiences. And he realized that in spite of all of his work, stuff was going backwards,
mm,
even in the 70s, right? So we're post civil rights laws in the 60s. Things seem to be going backwards for kids. They're not actually getting to experience the educations that he wanted. So
yeah.
keep going with it. So yeah, so
Well,
he started to devise why that was, or ask why that was. Go ahead.
yeah, and I don't think that it was like a direct. I don't think he had an eye to critical theorists, the philosophers from the Frankfurt School. I think that it, at least based on, I'm getting a lot of this from you, so maybe I didn't read you well, but
Yeah.
it seems like a lot of that kind of came together later, and it was kind of mixed together. And they say, hey, we can borrow some of these tools over from critical theory and stuff, but it wasn't like a complete outgrowth of critical theory. It was its own thing that's had some commonalities, and then borrowed tools back and forth.
Yeah. So what is critical theory doing? Critical theory is asking how power works in society to keep things the way they are.
Mm,
I think that's just again, a super oversimplification, but that's in a summary, that's what it's trying to do. How does power work to keep things the way that they are? And power manifests itself in a whole bunch of different ways.
mm,
And so the critical race theorists, they wanted a critical theory that looked at power, but they wanted to look at it through a racial lens.
yeah.
Most of the critical theorists were white folks who weren't thinking about race.
Mm,
Okay, so the critical race theorists are saying, let's be critical. How does power work? But we're gonna add race to it. And they felt like those who already had a good racial theory were not critical enough. In other
mm,
words, the kind of the liberal, big L liberal philosophical view of the world that basically says, let's just kind of, if we just even the playing field, everything will be okay. If we pass a few laws, everything will kind of get back to normal, so to speak.
mm,
And they felt like that racial theory was naive, that you actually needed to recognize that power was at work trying to maintain things the way they had always been in a lot of
mm,
different ways. So a critical theory that was more racial and a racial theory that was more critical, with a kind of a big C, critical. And so I would just say this. I've been saying it this way: that critical race theory ends up representing this counter narrative. It's confronting a particular racial narrative that basically was saying we're okay now.
yeah.
Everything is good. Again, and that's a little bit over the top, but it's really how people wanted to believe in the 70s. We're good now. And so those guys were just going to make an effort to show all the different ways that that was not the case.
Yeah. And at least based on the book here, they were dealing with the early writers in critical race theory as it started to take form, were like they're dealing with economics, criminal justice, housing, and education type stuff. And the education with segregation and housing, I mean, what a mess there with redlining and stuff like that.
It is fascinating. Let me just say this, because I just feel like this doesn't even maybe get said enough when I have chances to talk about this stuff in podcasts. Regardless of where anybody winds up politically, it really is fascinating to take any one of those social lanes and just sort of slowly study how has race played a role in the criminal justice system?
Yeah.
How does race show up there in ways maybe you've never thought of before? How does race, even better, how does it show up and play a role in education and the way education has worked? What's the history of it?
Mhm.
How has it changed? How does race continue to play a role? You said the housing market. Again, I think everybody just thinks, man, houses are just out there and anybody can get access to them.
Right.
That's just not true. It's
Mm.
not the way it's certainly not the way that it's worked historically, and even today, there continues to be power that's at work to try to help some people be able to move into some areas, and still you wanna keep some people out of these areas, and it's
Yeah.
not even just racial, right? If you
Yeah.
just dig into that a little bit, I'll put it for myself. When I have dug into that, I've been surprised at what's really going on. Maybe that's true anytime you study history, and you get the chance to look behind the curtain and find out what really went on in the meeting all
Yeah.
these years later, right? When somebody testifies to what actually was being said or the way this decision actually got made. It's always more fascinating.
Yeah.
That's true in race too. It's true when you study and look through the lens of race historically. It's fascinating.
Yeah, it is. We, as a AI staff team, we've looked at some of the ways that Chicago's carved up, and you look at things like Bronzeville, and you're like, oh, that's a nice place. And you're like, well, it's only there because of redlining, and black people were only allowed to live in one spot, and they called it Bronzeville because the black people called it
Uh,
Bronzeville themselves to
Yeah.
say this is our place, but it's the only place they were allowed to live, and it was like, I mean, there's some cool stuff with jazz that happened, but it's also like, dude, imagine not being able to live somewhere because the color of your skin. That's insane.
And there's a trickle down effect then to what happens to the education system as a
Yeah.
result of that.
Mhm.
Tax money, um, house ownership, and whether people actually were able to own their houses or not in these different communities. Most of the time they weren't. Can you get a loan so that you're able to own it yourself?
Right.
And in each spot where you look at that and say, yeah, no, you're not going to be able to get a loan. No, you're not going to be able to go to a good school. No, you're not going to be able to do this or that. Oh, then let's throw some crime in there. Crime looks like an easy way to get out of this. Well,
Yeah.
that has negative consequences on a community, right? And you just realize the dominoes start to fall, and it's a lot less clean than
Yeah.
what I'll just say a lot of our white brethren would like to think. It's a lot messier, actually. I'm just looking through a racial lens.
Yeah. Well, so Ed, those things make sense to me. You can see them, their history. You can look back and say, like, dude, this was literally called Bronzeville. There's the new branch that started in the 1990s. We talked about this a little off air, but these are the matters of concern here are microaggressions, racial insults, unconscious discrimination and bias, affirmative action, and higher ed type stuff. Where I think a lot of people, this is like the Ben Shapiro critique, where it's like, look, point me to a law that's racist and let's go attack that law. But I can't make a law against your unconscious bias, because that's mind control or something.
Yep. Yeah, so we did talk about this. Like one group wants to focus on material conditions, and
Yeah.
another group is more changing the way people think, right? The language that's getting used, the the way advertising or messages that come through companies affect the way that we think about different peoples. And there's actually a lot of disagreement amongst early critical race theorists, and probably still goes on today, as to which is the more effective thing. Should we be more concerned with going after the politics of a local area,
Mm.
or going after the minds of people and challenging the way they think? And there's overlap there, of course, but two different strains of thought, and both of them can get weird. I mean, I guess we were talking about this beforehand, weren't we, Parker?
Yeah.
And as a Christian, I think we should do both.
Mm.
I mean, let me just say that. I think both of them have merit, that we should challenge material structures and material living conditions and material realities that people face. And it's not just because of race that things are the way they are. Let's look at the complexity of how things wind up the way they are
Mhm.
and pursue justice, pursue, in the best sense of these words, pursue equal opportunity and some of these things that didn't used to be as triggering as they are today.
Hmm.
And try to, how about this? Even, repair. People talk about reparations, which I think gets really funky quickly. But I don't mind the idea of saying, how can we take our resources and maybe overinvest in an area that was put at a deficit because of bad laws or because of just flat out racist practices or classist processes and policies. I have
Hmm.
no problem as a Christian saying, how do we address some of that? I don't like a
Yeah.
lot of the solutions I hear, but I think the conversation is worth having. And I
I,
think the same when it
well,
comes to
that's a really good. Sorry, that's a really good point. I wanted to touch on too, because you're like, you're not endorsing the solutions that are just have been so terrible. And it's I know someone could say, well, it's easy just to say, let's have these principles, not solutions. But that is what you're trying to say. You're trying to say, like, let's think about this more. Let's
let's
not
think
just
about
shut it
it.
off by saying it's wokeness or something, right?
Yeah, let's find another solution. Can the church offer a better solution
Yeah.
than just we're just going to give money to descendants of slaves?
Hmm.
Okay, I feel like we can do better than that.
Yeah.
I just, there's so much that's wrong with how that would play itself out. And so usually what people say is they dismiss the bad idea and then don't talk about it anymore.
Right.
They think the challenge to do something is a bad idea in and of itself. Like, let's just move on. And I
Hmm.
think, no, man, we can do better than that.
Yeah.
Especially as Christian people. Again, I'm not going to even try to figure out which political party needs to be responsible for that.
Right.
It's the body of Christ that needs to be responsible for that in their local sphere of influence.
Yeah.
And I don't have a problem with the other side of it either. What I didn't get to say is I don't have a problem with challenging people's minds and their thinking or learning that a microaggression that I've said something that's offensive to people. It becomes annoying when people are constantly on the lookout for
Hmm.
offenses, doesn't it? Like, that's
Yeah.
what people, I think, really recoil against, is that you're always trying to figure out how I'm messing up. And then we
Yeah.
live in a time now where that's become kind of a trendy thing, kind of a popular thing, over almost an overcorrection to not paying attention to these things at all. Now we're going to just look for them everywhere. And I say, well, I don't like that as a solution, but I don't mind coming back into here somewhere where it's like I'm going to become more sensitive to the language I use with people and not unnecessarily burn bridges with people because I just want to be sloppy with the way I talk or kind of
Yeah.
stubborn. I'm just going to do what I want to do. Screw you.
Right.
I think Christian love says I'm going to do what's best for you in spite of what it costs me.
Yeah.
Right. So it's just a different way of doing life.
Well, okay. So here's one that I've been thinking about on that note. I think about when I'm thinking about evangelizing, when I'm thinking about talking to outsiders outside of the faith. I'm like, man, I don't want to give unnecessary offense. I don't want you to be offended by anything I say. If you're offended by the gospel, that's fine. As long as it's the gospel that I presented well, that's between you and the Lord, dude. I don't
Okay.
want to unnecessarily give offense. That makes sense. But I'm thinking about like discipling someone. I'm like, hey man, you need to be tough. As a Christian, your identity comes from God. I don't want you going around talking about being microaggressed and playing that card. I want you to eat that offense for the sake of the gospel. So I wonder if that gets confused when Christians are talking about it, when they're like, well, everyone's running around being so offended. In my head, dude, I wrestled my whole life. I'm like, that's
Mm.
part of it. That's the culture I really resonate with. So when someone says like you're part of majority culture, I'm like, well, I don't know, dude. I have more in common with my black wrestling friends than I do with a non-wrestler who's white from rural Ohio. Like I just, yeah. Maybe that's naive, but uh, what do you make of that distinction of like the outside versus inside and microaggressions? Like, should 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 ethnic minority Christians also be playing up microaggression? Playing up sounds wrong, right? But should they
Yeah.
be have an eye to that? Like, what should the Christian community within the church be thinking about that and using those terms? What do you make of that?
Here's what I want. I want my African American friends to have, no, I don't want to say this. When I'm in relationship with people,
Mhm.
they're not nearly as they're not paying attention anymore to being
Yeah.
offended by me, or I get away with a lot more in relationship. What does relationship mean? It means I've listened to your story. I've empathized with pain. I have shared my own story. I've had a chance to tell my prom story.
Yeah.
We've had a chance to exchange what our journey has been, right? You've been through some things together. You know each other's opinions about different things that happen. When there's something horrible that happens in society that's around race, I'm actually able to empathize with it before I try to figure out whether he or she was a criminal right away,
Right.
right?
Right.
Like when you have relationship with people, that stuff tends to fade away, man. It
Yeah.
really does.
Yeah.
When you don't, or so when you ask, when I'm meeting a student, yeah, I would hope that eventually they would grow in their not only their security in Christ, but also their security in our relationship, and that they would meet more people like me, such that the people that are bringing the microaggressions into their life just become kind of this little blip on the radar for them.
Mm-hmm.
Parker, I feel like for maybe too many, because we've done such a lousy job of paying attention. Again, I say we, because white evangelicals, let's center it there, have tended to always be able to find a way not to have to take these discussions very seriously.
Yeah.
And that is also, it's just true, man. It is
Yeah.
true that we have always found a way throughout history. This is an interesting study too, just to see the different ways through the decades that we managed to dismiss or write it off or just kind of get rid of it as a topic without actually engaging what our brothers and sisters are asking us to engage.
Yeah.
So does that make sense? Like, I think a
I,
lot of that stuff dissolves. It starts to dissolve in good relationships. So we need better relationships.
yeah. I think that's, I mean, that's right. Yeah. I think that's right for sure. I definitely resonate with what you're saying about the church wanting to push things off. There's this kind of phenomenon that happens where it used to be millennials would make up words, and then Gen Xers would kind of get them, and we'd be like, okay, that's cool. And then the boomers would get them and be like, dude, all right, that word's done. So like mic drop was a big one, where it was like most of us were like, dude, mic drop's kind of cringy. And then like Gen Xers would be like, mic drop, bro. And be like, okay, man, I can let it slide because I like you. And then the boomers got it. I'm like, and mic drop. And they're all boomery about it. And you're like, dude, please stop. So I saw this happen with woke, where my buddy was a sociology degree in undergrad, and he was telling me about all this crazy stuff going on. And he was black. He's a giant black dude, my wrestling like partner. So me and him were boys. And he
Okay.
told me about all the crazy stuff, but he's still like, no, some of this is good. But shoot, where was I going with that, dude? I totally lost it, man. Oh, so woke came through, and people were using it unironically, like, hey, I'm woke, right? I understand. I'm been enlightened. And then it got kind of cringy, and the older generation started using it. We're like, all right, that's fine, we'll give you a break. And now I've seen a lot of my boomer friends who use it to just write off the whole process, right? So it's like someone starts talking about race, and now they're woke, and now I don't have to think about any of that because I get to tag it with this line, and that means it's done. And so
Yeah.
I've seen that in my own life a little bit too.
Yeah. Oh, tons, man. And again, I think that's happening in the greater political culture, period. So we live at this time where the political culture we live in is not trying to find common ground. It's not trying to find understanding. It's not trying to see what do we share in the middle.
Mm,
And I don't think this is just being cynical, man. It
yeah,
is trying, how do we separate more? How do we make sure everyone is clear that they are the evil ones and we're standing on righteousness, right? So
right.
there's just this more and more, what do you call that when we're getting further and further away from each other?
Polarization or something.
Yeah, polarization. We're getting more polarized along partisan lines,
Yeah.
okay, partisan lines.
Mm,
And I think Christians actually should be resisting that impulse.
yeah.
We should be resisting it in both the secular political culture, but definitely within their church and within our congregations and within our different parachurch organizations. I just wish we would do a better job of trying to understand. I mean, that's just a word that I keep coming back to, and it almost becomes cliche. And it
Mhm.
probably will be another word that starts to take on negative connotations like
That's right.
empathy has, or
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
winsomeness is a bad word now. Understanding means I'm gonna try to understand the world as you see it. Like, I
Mhm.
want to put your shoes on, right? There's different ways of kind of getting at this. I want to look through the lenses that you look through. Because when I do that, it's just amazing how so much of this stuff starts to melt away. And not only do I actually start to feel something different for you that maybe I didn't feel before as I've gained understanding, but it causes me to see the world differently too, because I start to see it more through your eyes and not just my own.
Yeah.
And I realized the full extent of brokenness and what it means to live in a broken world, which I thought I mastered that in my 20s. You know what I'm saying? And I
Yeah,
feel
man.
like, yeah, I got that. I get it. I understand what it means to live in a broken world.
Hmm.
And it's like, dude, no, you don't. Because
Yeah.
the deeper it goes in the worse, the more pain there is, the more brokenness there is. It should create a lot more empathy,
Mhm.
a lot less hatred, a lot less animosity, a lot less confrontation with the other. I'm not saying there's not a place for that, because that's the other thing. Again, I know
Right.
that there is a place to push back on bad ideas. That, yeah, I'm not saying that there should never be any confrontation, but come on, Christian folk, like we've been kind of going right along with the culture we're worried about going along with the culture. We need to be worried about going along with the culture when it comes to political ideology
Mm.
and idolatry.
Yeah.
Okay. And learn how to become aware of how we're doing that and separate ourselves and start to operate towards one another more like kingdom driven Christian people,
Mhm.
and less like politically driven partisan people.
Yeah. Man, this is such a tough one too, because so many people are proud to be American, and I'm like,
Yeah.
"Great, great, dude." And it's like my grandfather served. I'm like, "That's great, man. I'm glad."
Yep.
For me, dude, I am an evangelical in like the truest sense of the word. That is who I am. So like as soon as this country starts going off in a different direction, I am not following those laws any longer. Like I follow the kingdom of God. That's who I am. I love
Okay.
being an American, but when those things change, I know where I'm going. You know what I mean?
Okay.
I'm following this guy and not this one. I think a lot of older generations especially, and I don't know, and maybe us too, and younger, but they haven't thought through the relation as a American citizen and a citizen of heaven. They don't have clear distinctions of, yes, those are separate, and when they go wrong, this is your priority and this one is not. And I think that would help some stuff, but I'm not going to be the guy to fix all this, I think.
Yeah. No, I agree, man. I think you're right. Um, I talk about this in the book. This was sort of a breakthrough for me. This will seem like I'm going in a different direction, but it's really more of the same. And that's
Mm.
Carl Henry.
Yeah, man, he's the
And Carl
guy.
Henry, yeah, right. Well,
I
and
love
he's
that.
like a kind of a father figure at TED's, right? I mean, the
Right.
chapel's named after him, and
The Carl Henry
I
Center. Yeah, man.
yeah, I still remember back in the 90s, he was still alive and he was walking the halls, and I had no idea who he was. I mean,
Mm,
he was
wow.
very old, and
Yes.
it's one of these moments where now I regret that I hadn't initiated trying to talk to him. I didn't realize what a legend he was until
Right.
after he was gone. But Carl Henry said in 1947, in response to seeing that in the last 50 years how evangelicals had separated the redemptive message of the gospel from the social implications of the gospel. They had separated those so far away from each other, and he called it an embarrassing divorce,
Yeah.
because throughout history those two ideas were always merged together, not in a heretical way, but in a way that says when you come to Christ, you will live a certain way in society and you will
Yeah.
bring the gospel to bear. Wow, how'd I get that fireworks?
I think you're using your are you using your iPhone?
I'm not.
Oh,
I'm on
yeah.
but that was actually that was a very dramatic moment right there.
Nice.
When you
Uh,
separate them, you're going to have a problem. And he said, we need to start teaching people how the Bible applies to and responds to social sin and social concern. And we need to get better at that as a result of our discipleship, instead of separating them and making them seem like they are necessarily adrift.
yeah.
Or we're mission drift whenever it is that we try to talk about how the gospel applies to social issues. And so here we are 70 years later, man, and I really do think we're living among the consequences of not enough evangelical leaders listening to him or
Mhm.
acting on what his concern was back then. And so when we as Christians hear any talk of social concern, whether it's race or sex or gender or any of these, again, the usual suspects that get talked about, we're ill-equipped. Again, we're is a broad statement, but
Yeah.
in my experience, I don't meet many Christians, especially white Christians, who seem very competent at bringing the Bible to bear on social realities. They haven't been taught. It's not part of our discipleship package at church or in our Christian schools. And so we're at a deficit, man. And so Henry warned, look, if we don't do a good job of this, there will be secular answers that come along
Right.
that will fill the gap for us, you know? There will be secular ideology that does care about the things that we should care about as Christians, that will give people an alternative way to think about and talk about how to fix them.
Mhm.
So enter Marxism,
Right.
enter any number of isms, that have come, any number of secularisms that have come along that people grab onto because they get this whiff of a kingdom answer, and yet it's not really a kingdom answer or a kingdom solution. They just don't know where else to go because they're not getting it from their Bible. They're Bible teachers.
Yeah.
So that's a lot of words. That's my concern, though. I'm much more concerned about than I am CRT is ruining the church. It's like, no, man, we were already headed in a direction that is ruining the church because we
Hmm.
don't know our Bibles well enough to bring them to bear on social isms. And in fact, we've been complicit in far too many of them, like racism, in such a way that undermines our ability to even have a testimony.
Hmm. Yeah. Well, side note here, Ed, I think something that you do really well is you use different words to describe the same thing. So a lot of times in these conversations, people memorize the lingo and they throw that around and as if everyone knows. But so often people have different ideas of what social justice means, and it's so like you say social concern, and it's like, oh yeah, yeah, no, how do you? I'm not going to argue the social concern. Eventually, that would turn into its own thing if we kept using it. But getting at the same point with different words, I really appreciate that you do that. I think that being steeped in the actual stuff helps you do that. I think a lot of people who don't know what they're talking about grab onto the buzzwords and throw those around, and I think that's really detrimental. So I appreciate you doing that. I also appreciate you bringing up Carl Henry, man. He's the man, and everyone
Hmm.
forgot about him already.
Yeah.
People forgot about Francis Schaeffer too, but
Yep.
Schaeffer became the guy, and I was like, dude, Henry, this guy's a genius. Like, we need to go back to him. Um, I I think that a lot of people, a lot of evangelicals think that they're doing the evangelical thing by voting, right? I
Mm,
think that they're like, look, of course I care about society. I voted. It's not my fault that everyone else voted for someone else. When I think more of what you're saying is like churches being on the ground where they live, like helping to like bloom where they're planted. And like, does that sound right? Like,
for sure. It's interesting. I was just at an event with Justin Giboney, who
hmm,
is the founder, president, I'm not exactly sure what his title is, of the AND campaign.
okay.
And Chris Butler is another guy that's a leader in the AND campaign. I would highly recommend going to their website, okay? Because this is exactly what their ministry and the movement they're trying to create is about. Look,
Hmm,
casting a vote is one part of your political involvement. And I think we all realize, yes, it is important.
sure.
But I think we all realize that we never actually we don't see the results so much of what our vote necessarily, right? We don't necessarily
Right.
see it on the ground. Like it feels like that's almost inconsequential. And I'm not saying it is, but bear with me.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
Meanwhile, you've got people who are living life and all around you in your community, around your church, around your school, around your downtown area, whatever that looks like. And that's politics. That's politics on the ground. And we should their contention is, look, we need to be better equipped to be able to help people. That's really what it's ultimately about, is how do we be salt and light in the lives of people and remove injustice or confront injustice where it's present, step into poverty, step into brokenness, regardless of how things became broken,
Hmm.
and try to bring repair, try to bring human flourishing, try to bring health back to the table for people. And that's good work. And, that's just doable. It's right here, right? All
Right.
that needs is for me to have concern and not be indifferent to start, and then take some steps to take some initiative to say, how can I help?
Mm.
which is sort of an old school value, right? That has sort of gone away.
Yeah.
But how can I help make this space better in some way in the name of Jesus?
Yeah.
And that's what they're all about. I will go check their website out. They've just got a lot of very interesting ideas and disciplines. They've got this list of disciplines that they encourage people to embrace in the midst of trying to become more politically conscious as a Christian.
Mm.
Yeah, the AND campaign.
I like that. That sounds good. Well, I think even saying I'm helping in the name of Jesus helps even with that whole like, are you a white knight? I'm helping on behalf of white people. It's so weird, but it's like, bro, I don't know, man. I'm helping on behalf of Jesus. He's my Lord and Savior. I want to help you out. Like, let's do this.
Yeah.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah, a lot of that stuff becomes annoying, man. It does. And you want to be patient. People are trying to figure out how to fix things. A
Mm.
lot of people are trying to figure out how to fix things, and sometimes they overcorrect.
Mm.
It becomes annoying. And I want to at least say, hey, I appreciate people that are trying, even if I think their ideas are whack,
Yeah.
or they end up overcorrecting and replacing one injustice with another one. I still appreciate people when they're trying.
Mm. Yeah.
You know?
Well, dude, this has been great. Thanks so much for your time again. I think this might be 5. It might be 4. I'm not sure how many times you're on, but I appreciate it so much. My audience appreciates it. Again, the book is Untangling Critical Race Theory: What Christians Need to Know and Why It Matters. If you're not a Christian listening, there's still a really great history of critical theory, critical race theory, Marxism, and man, get an inside take on what Christians should be thinking. So it's a good book for anyone in the audience. Yeah.
I appreciate you saying that, Parker. And if I can just throw this in, the book, I really didn't even want critical race theory to be in the title. That was an editorial
For sure. Yeah.
choice that the publisher got to make. And I appreciated why they wanted to do it, because the book is ultimately answering the question, how does critical race theory actually help? How can it be helpful to us in the church? A lot's been written on what's wrong with it, how it's incompatible, what happens when it goes to these extremes. And I'm saying yes to all that, but I think it forces us to ask questions that are super helpful within our spaces. So that's what the majority of the book is about, is how do you slow down and look at these issues and look at these words and ideas, and what can we get out of them that's redemptive?
Yeah.
So that's what I hope people do, especially as we head into this political season where things are going to get nuts again around these words.
Dude, man, I love your work. I would not want to put my face into the buzzsaw the way that you do, but I'm glad that you do, man.
I don't want to either, but that's a whole nother story, man. I just felt like I had to steward this and be obedient. Honestly,
Totally.
There's a long story behind it, and I'm glad it was finally birthed. And there's some fear and trembling about what the response is going to be and what it's going to cost my family and whatever else. But before the Lord, I got it out. I tried.
Amen, dude.
Yeah,
that's right. All right. Well, folks, grab the book. I have a link in the description. If you want to get it there, you can support this podcast and help me commodify myself. Ed, actually, I have the advanced copy here because I'm super special. When does the book actually come out?
It comes out June 25th. Yeah, in
Nice.
fact, I just got them. The funny thing is, it comes out June 25th, but I just got this past week. They just sent the real copies out. So
Nice.
I actually love what they. Yeah, I love what they did with the cover.
Yeah.
So yeah, I'm totally interested in interacting with people out there. If you get your hands on it and have questions or want to interact, you hit me up on Twitter. And I'm going to try to get a website made for the book within the next couple of weeks, actually, at untanglingcrt.com. I hope is where it's going to wind up.
Okay. Awesome, man. That'd be great.
Thanks, Parker. Thanks for helping.
Yeah, thanks again. All right, folks, that's going to have to do it for now. This has been Parker's Pensées, and as always, all glory to God.